Hey there folks, Graham here and welcome to the channel. Gas, most of us have it. Of course, I'm talking gear acquisition syndrome. But how many synths do you really need? And what synths do you really need? Well, that's pretty subjective I suppose, and it depends on what you're going to use them for. If you're just creating or recording tracks, you can get away with fewer, maybe even just one. You can record individual sounds and layer them up in order to create a completed track. But if you're playing live or you just like jamming live at home, you may need more synthesizers so you can play multiple sounds simultaneously. Well, today I'm going to walk you through what synths I have and why I have them. The focus here isn't really which synths they are, i.e. the make and the model, but what type of synths they are. And I'll be focusing purely on hardware synths here, as VSTs are a whole different dilemma. Please stick around, and if you've got any questions on any of the equipment being covered today, then please feel free to leave a comment down below and I promise to do my best to answer them. First up is my Yamaha MODX8 Plus, which is a workstation style synth that covers an awful lot of ground. From acoustic to pianos, to orchestral, to full-on synth stuff. And also drum kits. Also, as a piano player that occasionally plays live, I wanted a full 88 key hammer action. This is the keyboard that I practice on, I learn songs on, and is my primary keyboard for composing. I tend to compose solely on the piano and then translate it into something more synthy once I've got the whole song fleshed out. There's plenty of choices out there from Yamaha, Korg, Roland etc. But in my view, I don't think you can really go wrong with a workstation, especially if it's your one and only synth. And they can pretty much do everything, and there's a great choice of either 61, 73, 76 or full-on 88 keys, dependent on your needs, your budget and of course space. But although this sounds great, I predominantly use the presets in it with a little bit of tweaking here and there, and wanted some more traditional synthesizers so I could really look at designing my own sounds. Although obviously some of those also come with presets which can be a good inspiration, and sometimes those presets, they just work. Next on the list therefore was an analog polysynth. Whilst the MODX is very good, it is totally digital and can sound a little generic at times, and I wanted a bit of that vintage analog warmth but wrapped up in a modern package. And so the Behringer DeepMind 12 fitted the bill here. With 12 voices, it's a great synth, is very well priced and is massively powerful with 2 oscillators, 2 LFOs per voice, 3 envelope generators, a modulation matrix and its vast array of inbuilt effects. It can sound vintage or modern and can emulate synths like Roland's Juno 106 on which it's loosely based. Korgs like the Poly 6, or maybe a Roland like the JX3P. But also has its own sound and is immensely deep when you really get into it. Next up is my Arturia MatrixBrute, a full-on monophonic analogue beast with 3 VCOs, 2 LFOs, 3 envelope generators and a massive modulation matrix. From basses to leads to arps to sequences and on to ambient soundscapes and beyond. It also has the trick of being paraphonic and can play up to 3-note chords for greater flexibility. This is a monster of a synth, both in size, weight and capability, and with huge modulation options, the sound possibilities are endless. But being a mono paraphonic synth, it is limited. Now, I could stop there. I've got a workstation that gives me all my core sounds, including drums, a dedicated polysynth for lush pads and evolving sounds, and a mono for punchy basses, arpeggiated sequences and soaring leads. But although the DeepMind covers the analog polyphonic requirements, I also wanted a big VCO analog poly, something that could do the stuff like a CS80 or an OBX, but at a fraction of the cost. I ended up going for the 6-voice PolyBrute with its 2 VCOs, 3 LFOs, dual filters, 3 envelope generators, massive modulation options and extensive effects section, to name but a few. Again, it can sound vintage, raw, or smooth. And is probably one of the most versatile synths around with some unique features. Again, there's plenty to choose from if you're looking for a big flagship polysynth, but this one inspired me not only with its sound but also its features, such as the morphe, the ribbon controller and its modulation sequencing matrix that I was familiar with from my MatrixBrute. Also, it's not just a poly version of the MatrixBrute, they are completely different beasts with a different sound. So now I've got the workstation, 2 analog polys and the big mono synth, and to be honest, with these 4 I pretty much cover all the sound territory I want and could pretty much create any sound I wanted. However, I fancied dipping my toes into the world of modular and maybe looking at some more experimental sounds that I possibly couldn't make with a normal synth, and so opted for a semi-modular in the form of the Behringer Neutron. Analog with dual VCOs and 2 envelope generators, it's great sounding and can be used as is without any patching. But also has an extensive patch bay to experiment with rerouting signal paths. For example, here I've routed the noise to the VCF in, bypassing the oscillators, resulting in melodic noise. It's monophonic and 2-voice paraphonic, and again is great for leads, basses, arps and sequences, much like the MatrixBrute but with an altogether different sound. I predominantly control this using my keystep 37, using its sequencers and arpeggiator functions, as the Neutron has neither of these. Then we have my latest addition, a Behringer Pro-1. Building on the semi-modular nature of the Neutron, I wanted to expand this aspect, and I've always liked the Pro-1 sound as it's been used by some of my favourite artists, especially from the early 80s. Again, it's an analog mono paraphonic synth with dual VCOs, up to 3 simultaneous waveforms and a superb 4-pole filter. But this time has its own built-in step sequencer and arpeggiator, and it just sounds great and really fills the nostalgic gap that I was looking for. And then finally for drums, I have a Roland TR-8S, which is a great machine and covers most bases with sounds from a whole host of iconic machines and the ability to load your own samples. I did have its predecessor, the TR-8, which I sold to fund some new gear. However, I did miss having a dedicated drum machine and found this to be a step up and a much more capable machine. I do also have a Spark LE drum machine, but this always requires turning on the PC and loading up the Spark Drums VST, and the TR-8S just offers more immediacy and hands-on control. Also, although I do have plenty of drums on the MODX, a dedicated drum machine is easier to program patterns and create drum tracks. In addition, there's also my Roland Seaboard Rise 49, as a few years ago I wanted to experiment with MPE synths, or MIDI polyphonic expression. Although not a hardware synth as such, it really is just a MIDI keyboard, I love it for its unique expressive capabilities. It's especially great for things like lead guitar, or for evolving sounds with articulations that you can't really perform on a normal keyboard. And because you can manipulate things like pitch bends, vibrato, slides, etc. with one hand, you don't need the other hand to operate a mod wheel or a pitch bend wheel, which leaves it free to do something else. I then also have 2 MIDI controllers, a Keylab 61 and a Keystep 37, as well as an FCB 1010 MIDI pedal board. None of these 3 make any sounds in their own right, but can be used to trigger either my large collection of VSTs that I also have, or they can trigger any of my other hardware synths via good old-fashioned MIDI cables, which provides greater flexibility for me when I'm working. For example, I can use the Keylab 61 here to play the PolyBrute or the DeepMind that sit behind me, so I could use this to solo over the top whilst I'm playing the MODX at the same time, rather than having to twist round and reach across the studio. So, do I really need this many synths? Probably not. Am I happy with what I have? Yes, for now. Could I make the music I do with less synths? Most definitely. But do I use them all? Yes, I do. However, back to the original question. What synths do you really need? Well, I suppose there isn't really an answer. As I said at the start, it's all pretty subjective, and it depends on what your needs are, what your end goal is, what you enjoy, what motivates you, and most of all, what makes you happy. If I were to take a stab though, I'd say get a workstation for all those bread and butter sounds. A dedicated polysynth, a dedicated mono synth, and a drum machine. Those 4 should pretty much cover anything that you want to do. But if you haven't got a need for all the sounds and the orchestra sounds and acoustic sounds, etc. in the workstation, then possibly a polysynth, a monosynth and a drum machine will suffice. Oh, and when it comes to analog versus digital and which make or model, that's a whole other world of subjectivity and probably something for another day. Also, if I'm honest, I could do most of what I do using my computer, some VSTs and some MIDI keyboards. But I find that there's a real physical connection with hardware synthesizers that's hard to replicate when you're jiggling your mouse around on the computer. Sometimes I just want to turn on a bit or all of my hardware and just jam in the studio, coming up with ideas, and sometimes I'm happy to turn the computer on, load up some VSTs and really start delving into those, and more often than not it's a combination of both of those for hours on end. Well, that's about it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this little run through, and I hope it offers some inspiration or ideas that you can take away. If you have, please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell, as it really does help me to grow the channel and is really, really appreciated. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the usual place down below, and I'll do my best to get back to each and every one of you. But for now, I've been Graham, take care and catch you later.